I'd like to ask each and every one that has made their way here tonight that if you know the Lord and the free pardon of sin, meaning that if you have a time and a place that you could go back to where you know without a shadow of a doubt that the Lord spoke peace to your soul, I'd ask you to pray for me. I'd ask for you to pray for me as I approach the Word of the Lord. I struggled to find a topic to address here tonight. Tried to study last night and couldn't get anywhere, but woke up this morning, tried to study a little bit, and feel like I got a hold of something. And the Lord hasn't changed my mind since then, so pray for me. I'd like to talk tonight about the plan that God has for each and every one of us. Because if you're watching this or listening to this on Facebook or you're sitting here tonight, I want to tell you that no matter what you've been through in your life, no matter what you've done in your life, I'm the worst one that the Lord has called. I've heard other preachers say that, but I truly believe that I am the worst one. So there's nothing in your life that can hinder you and that can take you away from the plan that God has for you. Now, yes, there are things that we can get caught up in our life and we can miss that plan. Just because God has a plan for you doesn't mean that it's going to happen. There are things that we are going to have to do. There are things that we are going to have to put away in our life to align with God, for Him to be able to better use us in this world. And the scriptures that I want to read, I want to just read a few verses that can be found in Genesis chapter 37. And I want to talk to you tonight about a man named Joseph. And I believe that God had a plan for this man named Joseph. Amen. And in Genesis chapter 37, in verse 1, it reads, "And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." That's the verses I feel like we need to read to kind of set up who we're talking about. So I've already mentioned we're talking about this man named Joseph. And this, I say he was a man, but right here he was a young man. He was the son of Jacob, who was later named Israel. And through the seed of Jacob became the children of Israel, became those that God counted as His chosen people. And one of his children was named Joseph. And Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other children. And Joseph's brothers did not like the fact that their father loved Joseph more. So there was a feud going on with siblings. You know, I grew up with a brother, and from time to time, and growing up more often than not, we got on each other's nerves. I know I've preached here before, and I've mentioned one of those times where me and my brother had got into it, and I believe in this instance with Joseph and his brethren, it was bad. It was really, really bad. So bad that his brethren came up with a plan to pretty much take Joseph out. And when they realized that they really didn't want to kill him, they took him out and threw him into a pit. They took Joseph and threw him into a pit. And they said, well, let's sell him. Let's not kill him. Let's not lay our hands on him and have his blood on our hands, but let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. And so they took him out of the pit and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Well, it's mentioned here in the scriptures that we read that Jacob gave Joseph a coat of many colors. And when his brethren threw him into that pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites, his brothers took that coat and they dipped it in some animal's blood, and they took it back to their father Jacob and said, look, an animal has taken over Joseph and has killed him. And Jacob was very upset at this. I mean, he mourned for the death of his favorite child. Well, the Ishmaelites took Joseph and sold him into bondage there in Egypt. And they sold him to one Potiphar, who then Joseph became his servant. And while Joseph was living there in this man's house or under this man's care, being his servant, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him on numerous occasions. And Joseph kept on saying, no, I'm not going to lie with you. Get away from me. This is not going to happen. And it got so bad that this woman, Potiphar's wife, came up on him and took his coat off, and Joseph fled. Ran away from her. See, all of these things are happening to Joseph. And one thing that he is not doing is he is not giving in to sin. This woman that tried to seduce Joseph took his coat off and went and told the authorities that Joseph was the one who tried to seduce her. And so they came and they arrested Joseph and put him in prison. And while Joseph was in prison, there were two others that got in trouble there in Egypt. One of them was the Pharaoh's baker, and the other one was the Pharaoh's butler or cupbearer. And while those two were in prison, Joseph had a knack for interpreting dreams. So the two that were with him there in prison, they both had dreams. And Joseph interpreted the first dream, and he said, it's not going to be very long. You're going to get out of this prison and you're going to be restored back to the Pharaoh as his cupbearer. See, it was the butler that had the good dream. Now, the baker, Pharaoh's baker, also had a dream. And Joseph interpreted that dream and told the baker that it's going to come a time very soon that you're going to be taken out of here and you're going to be killed. As it happened, both of those things came to pass. Now Joseph told his butler, when you make it back to the Pharaoh, when you make it back and you're his cupbearer once again, don't forget me. Don't forget that I had done this for you, that I had interpreted your dream, and that you tell Pharaoh good things about me and get me out of this place. See, Joseph, even though he was in this situation, even though he hadn't done anything wrong, he still found himself in prison. Even though all of these things were happening to him, not once did he curse God. Not once did he question whether or not God had a plan for him or not. Not once did he say, God, why are these bad things happening to me? You must not be with me. Nevertheless, I told y'all that God had a plan for Joseph in his life. So the baker, he got taken out of prison and he was killed. The butler, or the cupbearer, was also let out of prison, and he was restored back to his former fashion. He was restored back as the cupbearer for Pharaoh. But you know what? The butler forgot about Joseph. The butler did not tell anything about Joseph to the Pharaoh. And Joseph was in prison for 2 years. And finally, the Pharaoh had a dream. The Pharaoh had a dream and brought in many of his people in front of him to try to interpret this dream. And when he found that none of them could interpret it, the cupbearer, the butler, remembered that Joseph had interpreted his dream, and that Joseph was still in captivity, and told the Pharaoh about Joseph and told him that I know one that can interpret this dream. I know one that can help. So the Pharaoh took Joseph out of prison and told Joseph about his dreams. There were multiple dreams that the Pharaoh had, and they were the same dream that the Pharaoh had had. And the Pharaoh questioned Joseph, what does this mean? It bothered the Pharaoh. And Joseph said, there's going to be 7 years of plenty in this land, and there's going to be 7 years of famine in this land. And so what does the Pharaoh do? During these 7 years of plenty, they stock up. They get ready for the 7 years of famine. And the Pharaoh places Joseph for interpreting his dream and interpreting them in a way to where I believe that God works on both sides. I believe that the Lord was in this, and that the Lord let both parties know that this was true, that this was going to happen. So the Pharaoh put Joseph above all the land in Egypt. Put him only second to the throne there in Egypt. You think God had a plan for Joseph? You think God had a plan to get Joseph away from his family? And yes, it might have happened in a bad way as far as what we may be thinking about. Took him and placed him in prison. Not one time did Joseph question God. Not one time did Joseph curse God. But when the Pharaoh placed him there above all the land of Egypt, just second to the throne, and thought favorably to Joseph. See, I had this question on, because we know the story, and this is a little sidebar. We know the account. It's not just a story, it's actually happened. We know the account of Moses. We know how the children of Israel was there in Egypt when Moses came there and brought them out. See, at that time they were slaves. But I had this question one time, how did the children of Israel get to the land of Israel? Well, it was because of Joseph and how much power he had there and was given by the Pharaoh. See, during this time of plenty, I told y'all that the Egyptians were stocking up. They were taking what they needed, and then they were taking a lot of it and putting it away, because they knew that there was going to come a time that there was going to be a famine in the land. See, a famine is like if there is a drought and crops don't grow, see, people don't have food to eat. So in this land, the Egyptians had just about all the food that one could acquire. So what does Jacob and his family, what do they do during this time of famine? They need food, so they journey to Egypt to go get food. While they're in Egypt, Joseph's there. He's in his heightened status there in Egypt, and he sees his brethren there buying food to take back to their father there in the land of the Hebrews. But he doesn't say anything to him. He doesn't say anything to him right off. But then he hides something in one of their bags. And they're accused of stealing. And they're taken out of the line. They're singled out and brought to the side, and they're questioned about it. And Joseph still doesn't reveal himself to them. Nevertheless, he knew who they were, but they didn't know who he was. So they go back, and Jacob tells them to return back to Egypt to get them some more food. So they go back, and then finally Joseph tells them, go get your father. I want to give you a place here. I want to give you a place here to live, because it's better here in Egypt than it is where your father is. So they go back and they bring their father to Egypt, and then Joseph reveals himself to his family. And the Pharaoh allows the children of Israel to have homes there in the land of Egypt, in the land to where it was the only food for miles. The only food, because it was the time of famine, the time of drought, the time where crops wasn't growing. And God provided His chosen people a place to live. You may say, what does this have to do with anything, Mitch? The Lord used Joseph. The Lord used Joseph and placed him in a situation that wouldn't be favorable in our opinion. Placed him in horrible situations. But Joseph never questioned. Joseph knew, I believe Joseph knew that God had a plan for him. No, I don't think he knew exactly what was going to come of that situation. But I believe Joseph knew that God had a plan. When he was sitting in prison, sitting in there for 2 years, we get ourselves in a situation and we wait for a week and we think the Lord has left us and we don't know what to do. But he was there for 2 years and still didn't question God. The Lord still had a plan for him. The Lord still has a plan for you. It's hard sometimes for us to wait on the Lord. And if the Lord did this for Joseph, now I'm not saying that the Lord's going to place every one of us in a high spot like he did Joseph. But the Bible tells me that the Lord is no respecter of persons. He has a plan for each and every one of us. Don't question God. You may be in a situation right now where you think the Lord is just not with you, that the Lord is not helping you, is not guiding you, is not leading you in a way that you think He ought to lead you. He still has a plan for you. Growing up, I never really gave much thought to what I would do when I got older. I never gave much thought about the plan that the Lord had for me in my life. But the Lord had a plan. And I didn't want to preach. I wish, back before I owned my calling to preach, I wish that the Lord would take it from me. And it may not be preaching. The Lord may not have preaching for you to do, but nevertheless, He still has something for you in your life. He still has something for you. It may be just to be that one to fill the seat in the pew on Sunday mornings. But you could still have an impact. If you've been saved, you got something to tell. Has already been said, as we were talking about earlier, the Lord has something for each one of His children. The Lord has a plan. I appreciate you hearing me. That may not be much, but it's what the Lord laid on me. And I hope he'll use it in a way that he sees fit. And I hope that somebody would get something out of it, and I pray that he'll bless you for it. I appreciate you hearing me.